Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show. And this week is another one of those Mozilla shoots itself in the foot kind of weeks, because they have a new CEO and he said some stupid crap already around Firefox turning into an AI browser, maybe looking at banning ad blockers and all of that crap, so we're gonna talk about this. We also have some more work happening on Wayland, we have the beta for Mint 22.3 and a bunch of other things, including this message from our sponsor. So thanks to TuxCare for sponsoring this video. You probably heard about them by now if you've seen a few videos of mine, but if you haven't, they're an all-in-one service provider that makes sure that your open source stack stays well maintained and secure with as little manual work as possible from you and your team. A big part of this is their endless lifecycle support solutions, which delivers long-term security patches to out-of-support, outdated versions of many open source products, including apps, runtimes, libraries, and also Linux distros, so you can keep the crucial parts of your infrastructure running even after they've gone end of life. And they've now added Debian 10 to the long list of Linux distros that they support. Debian 10 reached end of life in mid-2024, and running this version without security patches is obviously a very bad idea. Cyber threats can and do target these unsupported systems. TuxCare will let you keep running Debian 10 just like before the end of life date, and they will provide you with all the security fixes that you need for any new CVEs that pop up, including coverage for plenty of crucial packages in Debian's repos like Apache, OpenSSL, PHP, Python, and a lot more. So check out TuxCare's endless lifecycle support for Debian 10 with the link down in the description, and they also offer the same services for a bunch of other distros, and you'll get links to all of that from their website too. So, Mozilla has a new CEO, Anthony Anzor DeMeo. He replaces Laura Chambers at the head of Mozilla, and he published a little blog post that set the tone. He says that trust is the one issue in tech and browsers that they want to fight for, and that he wants Mozilla to become the trusted software company, basically making Firefox a platform that lets you connect to a bunch of trusted solutions. He says that Firefox and Mozilla can be what people decide to choose, decide to use, and to get to that result, he has three main ideas. The first one is that people must have control over how things work. Whether it's about privacy, data use, AI, he wants everything to be clear and understandable, and he wants people to always be able to turn off all the AI stuff. Second, he wants monetization of Mozilla to be fully transparent, so people know who's funding what, and that comes back to the trust issue he mentioned. So for now, this is all well and good. Those are good goals that Mozilla currently already achieves. But third, he wants Firefox to become a modern AI browser, a sentence that immediately kills any other effort that they want to make on other areas, at least for me. He says Firefox needs to support new and trusted software additions, thinking about AI stuff, and he says that this will remain the anchor of Mozilla, as in Firefox will remain their core product. Mozilla will thus invest in AI over the next 3 years, and they'll try to find other revenue sources than search, as in the Google search deal that they have. After the very much expected and deserved outcry from the community, Mozilla did confirm that they will be implementing a kill switch for all of these AI features to ensure users can disable everything. And they said that the AI stuff would be opt-in, but the developer saying that also said that just clicking a toolbar button could be considered an opt-in, so that doesn't really mean much, which is why it's good to have that AI kill switch so you can be sure that none of those features appear anywhere for you. This will be there in 2026, so I would assume by the time they start tacking on that AI stuff to Firefox, you'll already be able to disable it, but it still means Firefox will be laser focused on adding AI tools which will connect to known providers. So the usual suspects, OpenAI, Gemini, and anything else, that's what they're adding to Firefox. A way to connect to those, which in my opinion is a huge mistake, because that's already what everyone else is doing. And to add insult to injury, the new CEO also said to The Verge that Mozilla even considered banning ad blockers from Firefox, as this could potentially bring in $150 million of revenue if they did. The only thing that apparently prevented them from doing that is that it felt off mission. Not that it feels wrong to take away agency or control, not that it feels absolutely wrong to prevent users from doing whatever they want in their browser and to stop them from using actual useful tools. No, it just feels off mission. So literally the minute Mozilla's mission changes and becomes more focused on, I don't know, striking deals to display ads online, then I guess banning ad blockers becomes on mission and they're gonna start doing it. This is the stupidest crap you could have ever said as the CEO of Mozilla, and he says it on his first day. Wonderful. And then, of course, we have the entire AI issue. This, for me, is enough, combined with all the previous blunders of Mozilla, which have been very well documented. This is enough for me to delete any copy of vanilla Firefox from any of my systems and to never recommend anyone use Firefox, pure Firefox, again. For now, forks will be free of all that garbage. Hopefully, they stay free of it. The problem isn't necessarily the AI integration, you can turn it off. The problem is Mozilla is focusing on doing the exact same thing everyone else already does, months late, in a worse way, not in a more ethical way, not in a more open source way. It is a useless focus if you're doing it this way. It's exactly like bringing Firefox VPN or Firefox Relay or whatever else. You're copying existing products and not doing them better. The only differentiating factor is that you're putting the Mozilla or Firefox logo on it and people don't care. This is not the focus. People want a Firefox that is faster, that is more compatible, that has more interesting features. If you want to add AI, develop extensions or let extension developers make it and they will complete that integration for you. They'll make it faster and they'll make it better than you. You don't need to focus on this. Focus on differentiating yourself from all the existing AI browsers. You're just copying everything that everyone else does. Again, this hasn't led to any market share gains ever. It's still not going to work. You're still driving Mozilla down the drain. It's insane to watch and really disheartening. So hopefully Firefox forks will stay free of all that garbage. If they don't, well, I don't know what I'm gonna use. Now, fortunately, Servo is still making a bit of progress with the release of version 0.0.3, which of course is not at all ready to provide an alternative to Firefox or Chromium-based browsers, but the work is still interesting. The engine now supports context menus, so right-click menus for links, images, and various other web page contents, meaning you can start implementing some better functionality in a future browser using Servo. It also now supports the controls for HTML5 video, so you can play, pause, and all of that stuff. It supports compressing and decompressing streams as well. The Servo embedding API that lets you add a Servo-powered web view is also now improved, letting each web view set its own context, so I guess one web view crashing doesn't kill all the other web views in the system, and CSS is now parsed in parallel with scripts and the page layout for better performance. Of course, that is not really enough to make it usable as a daily driver. You would still need a competent browser UI around that engine, which currently is not really the case. But this is something that I'm looking at very intensely because with Mozilla going down the drain and everything else being basically completely controlled by Google through Chromium, we really need another option right now. Now there's good news for Plasma users, as KDE 6.6 will fix a few annoyances with Wayland, and they probably should because they're going Wayland only in about a year. So 6.6 will improve how screen mirroring works under Wayland, where previously it was sort of unreliable. It would sometimes work properly, sometimes not. Sometimes the image would be displayed on only one of the displays instead of being mirrored. Sometimes it wasn't to the right size or the right scaling. In short, it just was very hit or miss, and that is a super important big use case for anyone who uses Plasma to display any sort of slides, in a meeting, for example, or in a classroom. Also, scaling factors will be better selected by default when connecting to something like a TV, likely to avoid having extremely small interface elements at 4K, a super small mouse cursor that you simply cannot use at all. Again, very useful for displaying slides in conference rooms or classrooms. To help with all of this, the K-Screen Doctor command line tools now lets users add custom screen modes, and they will inform users that screen mirroring is available and possible. Now, there are tons of other things in Plasma 6.6, but the focus on Wayland specifically is crucial because they're gonna entirely ditch X11 support for the Plasma desktop in early 2027, so they basically have a full year to fix all the big annoyances that remain for specific use cases. This was one, and it's nice to see it gone. And still on Wayland, the new version of the Wayland protocols was released this week, version 1.47, which again improves the color management protocol and HDR support. They have removed some restrictions on various formats to let certain movies play in HDR. The previous behavior was apparently too strict in detecting various formats, which resulted in certain movies not playing in HDR when they could have. They also added new properties that let compositors state that they don't want the colors to be adapted to the display specifically, so things can be rendered exactly as they were intended, something that apparently will be useful for color proofing applications, so maybe stuff like color calibration tools. Now, this is stuff that won't be useful for a lot of people, but this is the kind of work that makes Linux a more viable platform for professional applications around a color grading workflow, around video editing, around photo editing, so this makes things better in the end because this makes the platform progress and it makes it a more interesting option for third-party developers. GNOME has decided to ban AI-generated code from all GNOME extensions. Their new extension review guidelines state that if there is any clear sign of AI being used to write that code, the extension will not be approved. This apparently comes after the team noticed a whole lot of extensions with what they call unnecessary code patterns, which is basically the AI generating lengthy code instead of optimizing or finding a more compact way of doing things, or just creating methods and functions that don't do anything. One of the reviewers says that he spends 6 hours a day reviewing 15,000 lines of code, which of course is not sustainable as a volunteer, and during this review process he found tons of try-catch code blocks that were not needed in a lot of new extensions, whose developers then confirmed that they used AI to write them. So what exactly will trigger an extension being rejected? Large amounts of unnecessary code, or a coding style that varies too much inside of the same project, which is a telltale sign of using AI because it doesn't really have a competent coding style if you don't teach it first. APIs being used that don't exist will also do the same thing. AI tends to invent calls to stuff that is just not real, so that's obviously a problem. Comments in the code that are clearly LLM prompts, that's also what certain AIs do. Any other clear indication that AI was used to generate large swaths of the code base will trigger an extension being rejected. You can still use AI for code completion, for learning tool. They are just trying to avoid AI being used as the sole creator of the code, and so they don't waste a ton of time reviewing something that their author doesn't necessarily understand. They just want to know that the person submitting the extension masters what the extension does, is able to fix problems, and is able to answer questions. If not, they just are not going to waste any time reviewing it. Totally reasonable. As always, AI, use it if you want, but you need to understand what it does and you need to understand how to fix the problems that it implements. If you don't, then it's just a waste of everyone else's time. Now, Rust in the Linux kernel is no longer considered experimental. It is now firmly ingrained as one of the languages that you can use to write code for Linux, as in the Linux kernel, alongside C. They're thus removing the experimental tag from all of that Rust integration, and apparently there was no pushback at all on this move, which seems to indicate that the Linux developer and maintainer community has now made peace with Rust after 5 years of sometimes pretty heated arguments around its inclusion. Of course, C is still everywhere in the kernel, it's still the primary language for most of the codebase, it is not being replaced at all. Rust has its use case, in Linux's case mostly drivers, but C also has its place, and it's still a predominant one. But when you look at what's been accomplished for Apple Silicon, for example, using Rust, or NVK, or the Nova driver, you can't really argue with the efficiency of Rust. Now, those drivers could probably have been written in C, maybe just as fast, maybe just as efficiently, but the fact of the matter is, if Rust had not been supported, maybe no one would have even started developing those drivers because people just wanted to use something else as a language. So the more stuff you support, the more people you have contributing, and this is something that we need in the open source community. Now, Linux Mint 22.3 got its first public beta. The new version comes with Cinnamon 6.6, which gains a new menu applet that is highly configurable by the user, but it also has much better input method handling and an improved on-screen keyboard, both things that should also help with the Wayland session being more complete. It's still not going to be the default for Mint 22.3. It might be in Mint 23 based on Ubuntu LTS 26.04, but that's not guaranteed. In the settings, you can also configure Thunderbolt support. You also have more options around how you can tile windows. Mint 22.3 also comes with a new system information tool that gives you access to plenty of very well formatted, very nicely placed information about your hardware and the drivers that hardware relies upon. Think KDE system information tool, but with a much better layout, because the KDE one seems to just be displaying info straight from a terminal, where Mint actually parses it and displays it in a more legible way. There's also a new system administration tool, plus the ability to pause file operations in the file manager, also in the timeshift backup tool. You also get per app notification indicators, you get better template management, Nightlight can now be on at all times if you want that, and there are a few other things. Now, if it doesn't release right around Christmas, I'll definitely make a video about Mint 22.3. If not, maybe it will wait early next year, or we just won't cover it if there's too little to talk about. We'll see, but I always like looking at Mint because it is a fantastic first entry point into the Linux world. Now, Alan Pope, formerly of Canonical and Ubuntu fame, is still working on stuff for Snap packages, it seems. He started a new website called Snapscope, which uses Gripe to scan packages for existing CVEs and vulnerabilities. The website just lets you search for a package name, an organization, or a developer, and you can see for every single Snap package how many open CVEs it has, and you have links to all of them to see what the problem actually is. You also get charts showing recently scanned packages, the highest vulnerability packages as well, and you can just queue snaps that have not been scanned yet for a scan. Generally, it seems that most of these vulnerabilities are linked to the bundled libraries that haven't been updated properly by the developers. This is an issue with most of these containerized packaging formats. You can use runtimes and external dependencies that are updated by the makers of the packaging format or by the makers of that dependency, but generally developers tend to include libraries that either don't have a runtime or that they don't know about inside the package itself, and those libraries tend to just go unupdated for a long time, and so they have vulnerabilities. The sandbox helps a little bit with mitigating that, but it's still a problem. So that's a very interesting tool, not necessarily for users, because I'm sure plenty of people would just never look at that, but for developers, because it just points the finger on this bad practice of bundling tons of libraries and just never updating them at all, just working on the code base for your app, because in a lot of cases, this will result in what you distribute not being very good for users. You should update the libraries that you bundle with any of your snaps, flatpaks, app images, or whatever, unless you're 100% sure that the CVEs that have been detected cannot be used in whatsoever way thanks to the sandbox or the way you actually implemented that library. So this is a useful tool. I know FlatHub is also looking at a way to push developers to update their bundled libraries as well and to move out of end-of-life runtimes. This is definitely something that is needed if these packaging formats really have to evolve to be the trusted way of installing software. Now, Denmark is also jumping on the let's ditch Microsoft bandwagon. They started moving around 600 employees from their road traffic authority to an open source IT system. They expect to migrate 15,000 people if this first pilot works out, and they cite flexibility as the reason to avoid having one supplier setting all the prices, the update policies, and the storage constraints, which just means they want to avoid being stuck with a monopoly, which is what Microsoft is. This open IT system is called SIA Open, and it's based, of course, on Linux, built by a company called Semaphore. It's based on NixOS, it uses LibreOffice as the Office suite, it uses Zulip for chat, Jitsi for meetings, and other open source software around that. It seems to be using Cinnamon as the desktop, judging from the menu logo on the screenshot on their website. Of course, using this system also means that the data will be stored in Denmark, so it complies with EU regulations as well, as using Microsoft products is still a bit touchy on that. You don't really know whether your data is being transferred to the US or is used for AI training purposes or anything else, so storing it at home is much better. It's a cool move on Denmark's part. Again, it is one part of one administration. It's not the entire country moving to Linux on LibreOffice. At some point, I hope all of these efforts start maybe working on a unified solution instead of having each admin try to implement their own Linux distro or their own version of LibreOffice and trying to maintain that over time. Would be nice to have a country-wide effort, or even better, an EU-wide effort that could be adopted with strong providers that you can trust for implementing these solutions. Local EU providers, not Microsoft Cloud, please. That would be pretty neat. So hopefully at some point this takes off, but this is starting to look like a big number of implementations being worked on. Hopefully they work out. And finally, the NVK driver is also getting some attention in Mesa 26 because they have merged support for compression. This just lets the driver compress images that are rendered and of course decompress them, so things use less VRAM and they can be transferred faster around the system for, of course, a huge boost in performance compared to the previous state of the driver. They've also merged support for larger page sizes, again to let the driver store information in bigger chunks, which also means fewer operations need to be performed and you get better performance. What kind of performance? Well, the merge request has a link to a Google Docs which indicates the FPS reached in a few games with these things enabled, and it's quite impressive. Atomic Heart, with all of these changes, reaches 67% of the performance of the official NVIDIA driver. Deep Rock Galactic is at 63%, Subnautica at 61%, it goes up to 92% for Serious Sam 2017. Basically, it seems that the older the title or the simpler it is graphically, the closer it can get to the official proprietary driver. There are exceptions. XCOM 2, for example, only reaches 44% of the performance of the official drivers, but generally, it is super impressive work. This means that NVK and Nouveau are catching up, and honestly, at 70, 75, 80% of the performance, a lot of people are going to take that trade-off instead of having to tack on an external module from NVIDIA, which oftentimes breaks. What doesn't break, though, are the devices from our sponsor. So they make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they're the only hardware manufacturer that I rely upon these days. Everything you see, read, or hear from me is done on one of their laptops running their own distro, Tuxedo OS, and all my gaming is done on one of their desktops as well, which is the Tuxedo Cube. They have a bunch of devices, all form factors, all price points, so you will find something that will suit your needs. You have plenty of options as well to customize the internals of your device, but also the keyboard layout, the logo that is laser engraved on the lid, all of that stuff. They're really, really fantastic, and as always, the link is down in the description. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it or watching it or whatever else you were doing in the meantime. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are and why you should click them and why it makes the channel grow, so please do all of that usual crap. And also you'll find plenty of links in the description to help me make this show in the future. Thank you all for watching. Happy holidays, happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, whatever we say, if you celebrate that. Thank you all for your support throughout 2025, and I guess you'll hear me in the next one next week. Bye!